Trump asked his lawyers for legal advice about pardoning Paul Manafort. Rudy Giuliani telling the Washington Post Trump's lawyers told him to hold off until the Mueller probe is over, and that Trump agreed. In a moment, I'm going to go to our panel on all of this stories breaking today, but we do want to begin with the reporter who broke that Manafort story, the Washington Post's Carol Leonnig. She joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Carol, good to have you with us this evening. Bring us up to speed on what exactly Rudy Giuliani told you.
So when we talked this afternoon, Rudy and I were talking about a lot of things. He was in Scotland. It was sort of later in the evening there. But I had a lot of questions for him about some of the issues that have been arising in the last few days and some of the president's tweets and Michael Cohen's guilty plea agreement. So anyway, what he said essentially was that the president had sought his and also Jay Sekulows' advice on whether or not to pardon Manafort and the timing of that. And he said later that this was really a conversation about everyone linked to the probe. And he said that his advice and Sekulows' advice to the president was, you can't do this now. You have to wait. The public opinion about you pardoning any of these individuals is going to be quite dubious, and you should hold off in making those decisions. Now, I want to give Rudy some credit as well. He called me back later after we posted the story and wanted to stress that he had remembered it imprecisely, and actually he feels like this conversation happened weeks earlier than he thought. First, he thought it was 3 to 5 weeks ago. He called back and said he thinks now maybe it was 2 months ago. A senior administration official believes that the president discussed this with his aides a few weeks ago.
Carol, do you get a sense, though, that the timing of that conversation occurred while the Manafort trial was underway?
Again, I'm going to credit Rudy Giuliani in his last corrected statement in which he says to me that he believes it was quite a bit longer before the trial. Now, Manafort was facing a lot of charges in a pretty damning case of tax evasion and bank fraud. It was fairly, high odds that he was going to be convicted based on those charges and the evidence that the government had. But again, I'm just going to let Giuliani say what he wants to say, which is that now he remembers it really probably was in June rather than in August.
So further along than recently. Did you get a sense at all, Carol, from your conversation with Rudy Giuliani as to why today did he mention this? I mean, he's obviously given a lot of interviews in the past. Was it your reading of his intent that maybe he was trying to send a signal to Paul Manafort?
I don't try to speculate or read people's intent. I take them at their word. I quote them verbatim. And what Giuliani was doing was what he does whenever we talk, which is he answered my question. I said, have you discussed a Manafort pardon with the president? And he said yes.
Fair enough. Okay, Carol Leonnig, appreciate it. Thank you very much. And now to the panel who may help us try to understand what all of this means and the day's fast-moving developments. While Trump is looking friendly toward Paul Manafort, he appears to feel differently toward this man.
Where are we going?
For a long walk. Thank you so much.
Good luck.
All right, so Trump today trying to create distance from Michael Cohen.
Michael Cohen, tell me about your relationship with him.
Well, he was a lawyer for me for one of many. They always say the lawyer, and then they like to add the fixer. Well, I don't know if there's a fixer. He's been a lawyer for me, didn't do big deals, did small deals. Not somebody that was with me that much. They make it sound like I didn't live without him. He was somebody that was probably with me for about 10 years, and I would see him sometimes.
Almost sounds like he's trying to make it sound like he's the Trump Organization's coffee boy, but that's far from reality. Cohen worked for Trump for over a decade on deals like a Trump Tower in Moscow. His office was a few doors down from Trump's in a space previously used by his daughter Ivanka. And Trump's only pushing Cohen away after his guilty plea. Today we learned new details about that case. Prosecutors granted immunity to Trump friend and tabloid executive David Pecker, who told them about the payments Cohen made to silence women alleging affairs with Trump. But Cohen isn't the only lawyer Trump's going after today.
I put an attorney general that never took control of the Justice Department, Jeff Sessions, never took control of the Justice Department. And it's a sort of an incredible thing.
All right, so that outburst prompting a rare public response from Sessions, who says he, quote, took control of the Department of Justice the day he was sworn in, and that it won't be improperly influenced by political considerations. With me now, former Congresswoman Elizabeth Holtzman, who as a member of the House Judiciary Committee voted to impeach then-President Richard Nixon. Jess McIntosh, a former aide to Hillary Clinton. Betsy Woodruff of the Daily Beast, and former federal prosecutor John Flannery. Great to have all of you with us. So lots to break down this hour. Congressman, if I may, I'll begin with you. Trump, on one hand, slamming his own attorney general, Jeff Sessions, the man he put in there, saying he did it because of his loyalty. He also went after Michael Cohen. But seems that at least floating the idea through various comments, either through Rudy Giuliani or ambiguous answers on Fox News, that he is considering a pardon for Paul Manafort. What do you make of this?
Well, I'm going to go back to Watergate, and I'm going to say that part of the articles of impeachment that was voted by the House Judiciary, Committee, had to do with offers of pardons to the burglars to keep them quiet. Let's just not forget that. That was part of it. The President of the United States authorized pardons for people, the burglars, to keep them quiet.
Are you seeing parallels, at least? Maybe not necessarily. What are the parallels? Is it the tone?
Of course.
Yeah, but I'm saying, like, maybe back then they were a little bit more explicit. Right now, we're not having a single person from the White House coming out and saying, yes, he will pardon Paul Manafort.
No, you don't need to say yes,
Right.
he will. That was very secret, the pardons.
Yeah.
The hush money was secret. The pardons were secret. That was part of the cover-up that got Richard Nixon reelected. What are the parallels? The President of the United States knows, Donald Trump knows, that Manafort may have some very, very damning information about him. It could even be criminal. It could even have to do with collusion. Remember, Manafort was in Ukraine dealing with the president of Ukraine. Putin was supporting that guy, and now Manafort becomes the campaign manager. Manafort may know a lot.
So definitely some parallels, yeah.
May know a lot. So wouldn't you want to keep Manafort's mouth shut? And this is not the first time, by the way, that we know that issues with regard to pardons have come out. I mean, Rudy doesn't just spill out stuff that's not relevant.
Right.
He's sending a message to Manafort, keep your mouth shut. Don't say anything.
Jess, I see that you're kind of wanting to get in on this part of the conversation.
I mean,
What's your take?
The Congresswoman is absolutely correct about this. There are, and it's hard to keep track because we literally had that Tuesday split screen courtroom situation, but there are actually two criminal conspiracies that were involved in putting Donald Trump in the White House that right now don't have much to do with each other. You have Michael Cohen and the hush money to the mistresses. You have Paul Manafort, who is at the crux of the collusion conversation. And right now, Trump and his team seem really adamant about moving the goalposts to say that this hush money to mistresses doesn't matter. Of course it does. It violates U.S. law. But there's no collusion, and we don't have that. And they seem pretty sure that they can be out on a limb with that. And I think that's probably because they seem pretty confident that Paul Manafort will keep his mouth shut, perhaps because of a possible pardon hanging out there for him.
Yeah, to quote the president, he says a crime is not a crime, or he's at least suggesting that what Michael Cohen did is not a crime. John, let me ask you really quickly, can Donald Trump really distance himself here from Michael Cohen?
Well, I don't know. If you know somebody for 10 years, it gets a little hard. And, you know, he was described as a fixer by no less than Rudy Giuliani, who said, that's what we do at law firms. And then he lost his job the next day, which tells us that maybe law firms have a better ethical standard than Rudy and the Beast, if you will. I don't see how he gets away from it. And if you just even listen to the one tape recording we had, it sort of puts the lie to this whole mess about the girlfriends, and that is that he's in a conversation, and it's all about the campaign. One is about talking to reverends in the South somewhere. Another is about whether Ivana's divorce, and those details will come out before the election is over. And then the third one is, how do we pay off AMI? How do we do that? And he says cash. That is, Trump says cash. And as Cohen comes back and says, no, we'll do it by checks. And we now know that that turned out not to be a good idea for a couple couple of reasons, including it would identify the fact that there was no journalistic behavior on the part of AMI and the National Enquirer. So they stopped that. But we have the other example in which plainly cash is being channeled around, and it's not from a campaign, and it's from Trump, and Trump is being contradicted by Cohen and details and facts and all sorts of things. But that's what he does.
Let me share with you guys some news that we were getting here. And you talked about AMI and the David Pecker situation. Obviously, he's agreed, or at least received an agreement of sorts to in the Michael Cohen connection about the payments. But we got this wire from the AP a short while ago. The National Enquirer's safe held damaging Trump stories. And in it, Jeff Horowitz writes, the National Enquirer kept a safe containing documents on hush money payments and other damaging stories it killed as part of its cozy relationship with Donald Trump leading up to 2016 presidential election. People familiar with the arrangement have told the Associated Press. We have that up there on the screen. So another interesting layer and development here. Betsy, let me ask you really quickly about Cohen's plea, because Trump said today that Cohen's plea was really about other business. It wasn't about crime. Take a listen.
He was in another business, totally unrelated to me, where I guess there was fraud involved and loans and taxi cabs and all sorts of things. Nothing to do with me, because he had an outside business. He worked for me. You could really say it was more or less part-time. He had other businesses. He had other clients. I'm not his only client.
Betsy, what do you make of that? The president there trying to distance Michael Cohen, trying to belittle him in stature, not in his role, not in stature. So how do you see that playing out as a defense strategy? Is that going to work?
To be fair, there is a grain of truth in what the president is saying here. Some of the charges to which Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty aren't directly related to the work that he did on behalf of the president or on behalf of then-candidate Donald Trump. But, of course, the most interesting part of that plea deal are the two campaign finance violations to which Michael Cohen did plead guilty, and the fact that Cohen himself said under oath that the president of the United States directed him to engage in illegal activity to help the president's campaign. All the throat clearing in the world, all the shiny object waving in the world is not going to change the fact that the president's former lawyer said that under oath. And the fact that he said it under oath is really important. Any journalist who covered the 2016 presidential campaign, myself included, can tell you that Cohen had a reputation for saying things that were not true, that he lied like a dog. It was kind of his thing, as did many people in Trump's orbit. But the fact that he said this under oath is really significant and points to potential legal jeopardy here.
John, let me come back to you just really quickly about this National Enquirer, that they've had this safe that has these documents, potentially damaging documents. Just to get it accurate, I want to make sure it has the documents on the hush money payments and other damaging stories it killed as part of its relationship, cozy relationship, I should say, with Donald Trump. Are those documents now subject to federal review, given the fact that you have David Pecker cooperating with authorities?
Well, I don't know if he's cooperating. He has immunity. At least that's the story I read, meaning he's being compelled to testify and quote, to cooperate under penalty of contempt, and if he lies, perjury. But that's what I understand his circumstances. So he's probably a reluctant cooperator. So yes, all the documents will come to the government, and what they'll identify or not is that there was a lot of goings on that had nothing to do with journalistic enterprise, and that these organs of AMI, particularly National Enquirer, were being used as part of the election, and they weren't being declared in any filing. But on top of it, what we have is, I think, a typical conspiracy to defraud the United States by undermining the election process. So there's a whole series of things that are opening up. And the fact that they want to give immunity to Pecker means that they're interested in getting others. Now, who? Well, we're going to have the president perhaps as an unindicted co-conspirator. I hope somebody has the gumption to name him in an indictment, because there's been nothing like this in the history of America. A president so un-American, who's not a Republican, who's compromising the United States. And using these pardons that he suggests, that's a violation of his oath of due process. That is to say, he's using his oath to protect himself from an investigation and those he would keep quiet, just as in Nixon. And if you can give Nixon credit, as Elizabeth might, he was not as bad as this guy, if that's possible to conceive of.
Let me ask you really quickly, Jess, when you think about the fact that Michael Cohen recorded his conversations with the president, that you had somebody like Omarosa record recording some of her conversations at the White House. You have now the National Enquirer holding on to these documents, these stories that, were supposedly killed, the trace of the hush money payments. It seems that anybody who was in President Trump's orbit, at least in some case, was trying to keep record of some of this negativity and some of this fallout, just in the event that they would be in the position that they are in today.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've been really drawn to this part of the story. The number of people who were very close to him, who had known him for a decade plus, who were apparently either trying to cover their own actions by having a tape of him doing wrongdoing, or waiting to set him up years down the road. The man ran his business like a small-time crime boss, and he brought people around him, the thugs who threatened people when they tried to take his ties out of Macy's, all the way up to his fixer lawyer, Michael Cohen. He surrounded himself with these people who played these small-time crime syndicate roles, and I guess they played them well enough that they knew to record the boss telling them to break the law, because one day they might have to play that in court. And today is that day, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like trust was very low among all of those parties. Congresswoman, before we go, I'd like to ask your thoughts on the fact that Jeff Sessions today responded to the president. He's been the subject of many attacks, but to see the Attorney General defend his own position and what he's been doing at the Department of Justice, what do you make of that? Rare.
Well, it is rare. It's a surprise because Jeff Sessions has been pretty quiet about all this stuff. But I just want to go back to the point I made before about pardons that John Flannery mentioned. It's not an issue of due process. It's called an abuse of power, and that is an impeachable offense. Abuse of power, to use your power of pardon to shut people up because they could tell the truth about you when you've violated the law. Trying to get rid of Sessions because he recused himself, which he had to do under ethics rules of the Justice Department, because what Trump wants is to shut down the Russia investigation. That's an abuse of power. What we are seeing here is the President of the United States systematically, time after time, this circumstance, that circumstance, abusing the power of his office. The swamp wasn't in Washington. The swamp was in Trump Tower.
And
it's now in the Oval Office.
Yeah, I wonder if he's being advised against firing people like Rod Rosenstein and Jeff Sessions in the same way that we heard Giuliani advising him against pardoning Paul Manafort. It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out.
Hey, I'm Ari Melber from MSNBC. You can see more of our videos right here, or better yet, subscribe to our YouTube channel below. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that.